and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. MBOM is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at MBOM, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the MBOM podcast. This podcast is brought to you in partnership with OfferingTree. OfferingTree has set out to make digital marketing fun, easy, and affordable. They are your one-stop shop for a website, scheduling software, payment, email newsletter, and more. Stay tuned to hear more about them later in this episode. And this week on the podcast, I am super excited to be joined by Christine Lacayo. Christine is a multi-lingual copywriter and content writer for impact entrepreneurs. And I had so much fun talking with Christine. We talked about everything from how she got into copywriting, why she became passionate about it. And then we really dove into the nitty-gritty around creating a personal and professional brand, how to create great copy as a yoga teacher, how to ensure that your brand and your copy work together, as well as top tips for creating great copy for websites, as well as integrating storytelling through your copy for both websites and social media. So we dive really deep into all things copywriting. And this is so important for us as yoga teachers because this is our messaging. This is what our students see when we put out things to the world. So we really need our copywriting to be in line with the things that we want to say and the things that we want to communicate. Now, maybe that sounds really easy, but in my experience, copywriting is actually much easier said than done. And Christine has some really awesome tips for how to improve your copywriting and how to start your own copywriting if you've been struggling with what your brand and your message is. So without further ado, here is Christine. Christine, welcome to the podcast today. I'm super excited to have you here with me.
Hi, Amanda. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I am so excited for this conversation. I think it's going to be so valuable to myself and listeners, and I'm excited to dive in with all things copywriting. But before we get there, can you tell me a bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a creative change maker. I'm an ocean lover. I'm an empath, obsessed with traveling and just getting to meet new people from different cultures, experiencing all of the wonders in this world around us. And I'm a multilingual copywriter and content writer, and I help sustainability and wellness brands find their captivating voice and their messaging, helping them have a unique impact with their community. I also write for a blog that I named Conscious Mindful Living. So that's where I write about conscious consumption and living a life of intention and purpose by connecting more with our natural surroundings.
Amazing. I love that. And I feel like everything you do and everything you stand for is just so aligned with, I feel like, the heart-centered businesses that, yoga teachers generally run. And I'm curious, what's the other language that you write in?
So I also speak Italian, French, and Spanish. Spanish is my native tongue. So I typically write in both of those, Spanish or English. And then when I say I'm a multilingual copywriter, I will typically liaise with if somebody else is like a French speaker or an Italian speaker, I could communicate with them and liaise what is it exactly that they're trying to write in English. And I'll feel comfortable, obviously, doing all of the copy in English for them. I don't necessarily think I could do copywriting in French or in Italian just because I have to keep up with the practice of that, but communicating with them and speaking with them, I could totally just liaise with that and then translate it all for them in English or Spanish.
Oh, that's so amazing. My Spanish has been I definitely could not write the same way I could write in English and Spanish, but my husband and I have both been working hard at it since we've been, like I told you before we started recording, living abroad, and we love Latin America, but I'll have to tell them this after because it's totally a goal for us to be able to write pretty high level, close to the level we can write at in English, in Spanish. And when we were living in Panama, just before we came home for the pandemic, our landlord was she's Panamanian, but she grew up between Miami and Italy. And it's so
Wow.
cool because when you interact with her, she speaks completely fluent English, she speaks completely fluent Spanish and completely fluent Italian. So she can just like
Wow.
weave the languages back and forth. And it's just
That's
incredible.
incredible.
Yeah. From somebody who's been on this second language journey for a couple years now, I'm just like, man, that's so goals for me.
Oh, I love that. Well, I love that you guys are trying and making an effort. And as soon as you hit that level, that peak, I feel like with languages, when you hit that peak where you're like, okay, I'm over that peak. I feel like I'm fluent. It's coming to me better. And then like other languages within those romantic languages, they just come to you so much more easily. That's how I felt when I was in France. I moved to France and I lived there for a while. And since I already studied and learned Italian after living in Italy for a while, everything was just like a jumbled mess for me. Like learning French, I was like speaking Italian and Spanish and mixing it with French, and people are like, "What are you speaking?" But then I finally like hit the peak where I'm like, okay, I can actually like put things together and understand what people are saying and also respond in a logical way. But it just takes practice. I love that you guys are doing that.
Yeah, yeah, that's so cool to hear. And yeah, there's definitely like many, I guess, like different levels that you get to. And we've just been kind of going through like a level of learning just like a more advanced level of Spanish so we can be more like colloquial with locals and
Right.
stuff like that. And that's definitely, I think this has been like one of the hardest jumps that we've been taking because we've had to learn like a ton of stuff that's just very challenging, like the subjunctive and,
Oh
you
gosh.
know,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just like this
All
stuff that
the
I think I'm like, what even is this? Do I know this in English? And our
Do I
teacher's like,
learn in English?
you don't even have this in English, but this is kind of what it's like. And I'm like, I didn't even know that was a thing. So
Oh gosh, all those conjugations are so confusing. So do you and your husband speak, you feel like you speak it very fluently or naturally in Spanish, but just writing is more difficult for y'all?
I would say I would never say I'm fluent in Spanish. I'm like an intermediate moving into an advanced level.
Oh, well, that's awesome. That's incredible. Keep going.
Yeah.
You guys are going to
Yeah,
get fluent
for
before
sure.
you know it.
Yeah, maybe in a next couple years we can do this episode in Spanish. That would be cool.
Yes, I would love that. That would be fun.
Amazing. Yeah, no, it would be so great. That's a goal for me for sure. And so I'm curious if you can tell me a bit about, just getting into copywriting. Like, what was it about copywriting that you're like, this is the thing I want to do and kind of became passionate about that?
Yeah, I love to tell this story because it's so funny how I kind of stumbled into it. I didn't even know what copywriting was. But so in my past, I've always worked within communications and content writing. I've always done a lot of blogging and content for various environmental organizations. And towards the end of 2018, my best friend, Susie, who's actually my business partner now, she lives in Austin, Texas. She was building out her branding and design business as a brand strategist and graphic designer. And she kept pushing me and encouraging me to get into copywriting since she knew I loved writing. She knew I had a great talent for writing. And she just was talking to me about copywriting, things she was learning in her branding world about starting a business. And I didn't even really know what it was, but I knew that I wanted a deeper meaning and purpose in my life and for my career. I always knew I wanted to serve people, the people I believe in most, for purpose brands, having an environmental impact or social impact with every ounce of my creativity to help them create this, sustainable future that I want to live and help build on values and purpose. And so she was like encouraging me, and I knew that I loved writing and I had this talent with words. And so it was just like, okay, well, let me do some research. Let me, figure out what I need to do. And I started learning more about it just online, listening to podcasts and reading. And then I kind of just like made a really rash decision, and I quit my full-time job. I moved back to the US. I was living in Costa Rica at the time. And I enrolled in the Copywriter Accelerator course. This is through the Copywriter Club. And I learned a lot about the business management side of copywriting through them and how to start your business and, taking on clients and managing clients and all that. And so then I just started just by through self-promotion and through my own word of mouth and networking, I started taking on clients. And I just kind of sort of put myself out there, took the leap and took the risk, dabbled in different areas of copy. And then I soon like towards the end of last year, found my real love within copy was with website copy and brand messaging. And this past year, just became even more and more confident after having all that experience. I just started my business last year, using my writing and skills to help other for-purpose brands find their perfect brand message and their voice in order to attract their ideal audience. And to me, that just makes me feel so fulfilled and excited that I'm living out my true calling and helping move the needle forward towards a more sustainable future through, helping others with my writing.
Yeah, that's so inspiring to hear. And I love, hearing that you took this big leap of faith and quit your job to do this. What was that like? Like, you're living in Costa Rica, you're working full time. You're like, I'm just going to do this thing.
Oh my gosh, I definitely don't recommend doing what I did, because I didn't really have a plan. And my older sister, I grew up in Atlanta. I moved back to Atlanta to be closer to family. I knew I wanted to be closer to family, and I wanted kind of to like ground myself a bit more. I hadn't lived in Atlanta in like 6 years. So I've like just been bouncing around everywhere. And so I was ready to just ground myself and like create a community and start a business. And so for me, it was just kind of like really, I just knew I had to do it, but I didn't really have a plan or like really much savings either. So it was not the best decision. But thankfully I have an amazing family, and I helped my sister with her twins. She had baby twins around the same time I was starting the business. So I was like, okay, I'm moving in, I'm helping you with the babies. Like, let's just all hands on deck. And I was just like kind of built the business while nannying for my sister and barely sleeping, but it worked. And I learned as I went.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. So you basically like stepped into sort of like a part-time mother role while building a
Yeah.
business.
On top of that, I was like, I feel like I'm a mother, right? And
Yeah.
hats off to all the business mamas out there. I mean, I just am so inspired by all of y'all, because it's a lot. And I had a little taste of it while I was with my sister.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't even imagine twins. I feel like that's just like,
Oh
it's
gosh.
insane. So I'm sure she was really grateful to have your help.
Yeah, she definitely was. But yeah, that
Amazing.
was the kind of the process. I left and came back here, and I've been here since last year, since April of last year. So it was just, I miss Costa Rica all the time, but I knew this is my time to be back home for a while.
Yeah, for sure. That definitely makes sense. And I think there's, different chapters in life where we can go different places and do different things. And it's amazing that you've stepped into this chapter of, being back home close to family and also building your business, which is really cool. So,
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
one of the things that I hear from yoga teachers a lot, maybe one of the things I hear the most when I talk to them about, building a business and kind of thinking about what their brand is that for a lot of yoga teachers, they're independent. So, take me, for example, like I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, and how do I encapsulate that into a brand? And I really love the idea of creating a personal brand just in general, but I know for a lot of people, this is really, really hard. And I feel like this is kind of like the starting point for figuring out everything else that's going to come, your storytelling, your copy on your website. So I'm curious, like, as somebody, and specifically yoga teachers, are kind of stepping into this world of building themselves as a brand, where do they even start with figuring out what that means?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Just as like the starting point to, to where you're even going and what your bigger vision is. So the most important thing I would say to creating your personal brand is to really first get clear on your purpose and your why. And so this really sets the stage for the rest of your brand, and like what you said, what comes after your copy and your visuals and all that. So your why should really be that strong foundation that you build your brand on top of, and that's basically what's going to guide you towards truly embracing your work and finding that fulfillment within your work and your life. So how do you do this? So Susie and I, who I mentioned earlier, we touch on this, and we just created another business together, like Creative Changemaker Studio, where we touch on branding and copywriting together. And so I recommend finding a quiet place and just kind of like sitting with yourself. And my form of tapping into my subconscious and into my highest self is by meditating and praying. But for everybody, it's different. For you, it could be listening to music or drawing or doing yoga or anything, swimming. So while you're sitting with yourself and doing that, whatever it is that you're doing, to go inwards and to tap into that, into your space, I always tell people to ask yourself, these certain questions and just like really give yourself that time and space. So you could ask yourself, why am I starting this business? What inspires me about this idea? What's my purpose for being an entrepreneur besides making money? And sometimes people don't really know what they want to do, or they know they have a higher calling, but they don't even know, how to get there, what it might be. So I say to them, still sit with yourself and ask questions like, what am I supposed to do with my life? What's my bigger purpose in my life? Or what gets me out of my bed in the morning? And just kind of sit with that and let the messages come to you, and be open to different things, be open to different messages and visions, because something crazy might come out of left field and you didn't even think about or know. But just be open to that and then act and follow on the ones that you believe to be true. And so this is where I really recommend to start. Like once you have your purpose and your vision really, really clear, and your why really clear, you can even write it down to see how it sits with you written out. And, you can even record yourself speaking it and listen back to it and say, is that really what I'm here to do? Is that really what my calling is? Once you have that really clear, building out all of your core values and understanding who your ideal audience and clients will just flow naturally from there. That's like the corner, the stepping stone, the foundation first is your why. And then from there, your values and your ideal client and ideal target audience comes after.
Okay. I love that. I feel like that, fits really nicely with, all the yoga teachers I know. And I think it's beautiful to think about just connecting inwards, because it is so true. Like, I think especially when we're building a personal brand, and it's really us, and it's like this message that we want to communicate. We just have to kind of get clear on what exactly that is, so that we know like what we want to offer, who we want to target it to, what we want to say about it, and all of that sort of stuff. It's like all the stuff exists because it's us. We just have to figure out exactly what it is.
Exactly. There's a really good concept. I don't know if you've heard of Ikigai.
No, I haven't.
Have you heard of the Ikigai? It's basically that. It's basically, finding your why, finding your purpose. It's a Japanese concept that basically means, I think in Japanese, it means why you get out of the bed in the morning. But you find out like it's this like Venn diagram, and you fill it out and you go through and you fill in like, what is it that you love doing? What is it that the world needs? What is it that you could do and be paid for? And the other one is, what's the last one? Oh, what are your talents? I think is the last one. Like what are you really good at? And so in the center of all of those is what your Ikigai is. It's what your purpose and your why is, why you're here on this earth. And so when I do that, I've led that session before in my past job, and I loved it because it's like, it's like this little, and it's not something that'll come to you overnight. It'll take time to get there. But when you see people do find it there, it's like a little light goes off in their head, and I love it.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I'm going to have to learn more about that, because it definitely sounds right in line with what I'm interested in, and definitely something that could be valuable to check out. So that's
I can send
great.
you over. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you for that. And so then, okay, so we have kind of this idea of our why and our purpose. And then, that's kind of like, finding that corner piece of the puzzle that gets us anchored somewhere. And then what comes next in terms of beginning to create copy? Like, how do we start to fit our brand together with our copy and start to create that messaging?
Yeah. So before you even start writing, I would say it's really important to first know who you're speaking to. So who is your ideal client, and what are their biggest motivations? Again, so what makes them get out of bed? What are their biggest triggers? What are their pain points and behaviors? So really knowing that target audience and your specific client, even picturing them as one person, knowing them like the back of your hand. It's a lot like acting. You have to fully step into the character you're playing and basically embody them with your entire being. And so spending some time doing some research around that type of group or around that type of person that you want to serve is really important first before you start writing anything. And so I recommend, a lot of times I talk about going to like hanging out online where they hang out. So maybe going into Facebook groups where they are, like where your target audience would be, or LinkedIn groups, read their messages. You can even interact with them. You could even ask them if they would be open to doing like just a short interview with you, just asking them some certain questions about their life. Or even going on Amazon and like looking at books that they might read, looking at the reviews is a good little trick too. And so you can just go in there and just start like message mining and reading all of that stuff. And And that right there, those are phrases and messages that are like little gold nuggets for you. That's basically how you're going to formulate your copy, and it helps you speak directly, helps you start writing so that you're speaking directly to them. But then once you have those messages and those phrases, and once you know what you're going to write, you also need to know how you're going to write it. And your brand is, like you mentioned earlier, it's an expression of you. So what is your brand's personality? And that's basically your voice and your tone. So you have to really hone in on your voice and tone, which basically describes your personality. And I create these voice guides. I call them sacred voice style guides, that goes into detail of all that. So you find your voice, is it a friendly voice or is it a bold voice? You find your tone, your values, your tagline, your brand words, your elevator pitch, all of that goes into these guides. And basically it helps align your brand and your copy well. And it kind of navigates you. And if you have a team as well, you can always give these guides to your team so that whenever they're writing content for you, they know that they're on target too. And it's really important that your brand always sounds and feels the same, sort of like a best friend. You would be weirded out if all of a sudden you called up your best friend and they started talking to you in a strange slang or in a different accent or a different language. So it's the same thing. Your brand should be consistent and should be, the same kind of voice and feel across all platforms, and consistent. And that's how your consumers are going to fall in love with you and fall in love with your brand, just like a best friend. So really making sure you're speaking to that ideal person and that one person, and you're consistent with your messaging, will really help you build sustainable and fruitful relationships, but also help you align that brand and copy as well. And then I would also recommend, one thing I forgot to mention is, before any of this, I always talk about, because I'm also really into like a lot of the mindfulness work and just like really reaching your highest potential. I always talk about doing like mind work, like mindfulness work, just to release any mental blocks or self-limiting beliefs that you might have about yourself or even about your industry, so you can fully express your most authentic, true voice. Because basically, again, your brand is an expression of you. So if you have any mental blocks behind what you're trying to say, then it's not going to come out as naturally or as authentic as it could. So I've recommended in the past doing like some throat chakra exercises just to open up your voice a bit, or finding like some affirmations or mantras that you could say to help create a new narrative in your mind. And as that weird as that might sound to like help your copy, it really does. It helps you create better copy that is completely authentic, completely coming from you and aligned with your purpose and your mission.
Yeah, no, I love those tips and suggestions. And I think it's really interesting because before I kind of dove into this with my own business, like with MBOM, I kind of thought, like, I'd done work for other companies, and I was like, oh, it'll be a lot easier for me to speak from the perspective of myself, of my business, because, I'm the voice behind this. But it was actually a lot harder in some ways, because I did have to get clear on all of this stuff and kind of figure out like, okay, so like, how does my brand speak? And it's like, well, how do I speak? Is my like natural personality, is that like the personality I want for the business? And of course, there's going to be elements of who I am weaved in because I'm behind the business. Yet I feel like there is a difference in the tone that I put out based on different things that I'm doing. Like, for example, if you look at like my personal Instagram, there's definitely like more of a flavor of just who I am. And with MBOM, there's like, okay, the tone of voice is more professional, and it's, everything I'm putting out there has to do with yoga business. There's not really that much from like my personal life in there. And then my husband and I run a travel podcast, and we had to figure out like what the voice of that was together, because now we're weaving in the two of us and focusing on the travel side of things. And you think it would be easy because at the end of it, it's like, it's all me, but it's like, there's these clear distinctions between what each element is and kind of how I want to portray them. And getting clear on the why is important, but then also understanding who you're talking to is so, so important, so that you can understand how you want to say your words.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where a lot of like the message mining that I mentioned earlier is really, it's going to be like your best friend, because sometimes when you're stuck and you're just like, oh my gosh, well, how do I say this? How do I make it the voice of my travel? How do I make it distinct from my travel podcast to your yoga podcast? But going through, like you said, going through your messages or your groups of those distinct audiences and seeing what ticks for them, like what motivates them, what inspires them, is that's where you're going to get your copy from. And I also think that, like, after, like, reassessing too, like after a few months, if you're just starting out or if you're not sure if you're still aligned well, like reassessing after a few months of like the clients that you're taking on or that are coming towards you or being attracted, are those the type of people that you want to speak to, or are you wanting to kind of reassess your voice and rewire it a bit? And I think that's totally okay as well.
Yeah. I feel like with branding, it's a lot about, always reassessing that you're like, I guess your compass per se is still pointing in the north that you want to go in. And if
Yeah,
it's not, just, shifting it that way, like maybe who you're targeting shifts or maybe you grow and change. And I think that that's a natural evolution with a personal and professional brand, is that like at some point we
sure.
might be talking to somebody different, or we might be offering something different, or we might be offering a new product or service, in the mix, or we might be going through like growth and kind of leveling up our business. And maybe the conversation is going to change as we do that.
For sure, I 100% agree. Yeah, and it's constant evolution with business and with personal brands, professional brands. It's always changing. Change is good too, and it's good to not resist the change. So I agree completely.
Awesome. I love that. Hey everyone, we're just taking a quick break from the show to talk about OfferingTree. If you're looking to get your yoga classes online in a hurry, I recommend checking out OfferingTree. They make it easy to schedule and take payments for online classes with Zoom, Skype, YouTube, and other video conferencing tools. OfferingTree set out to make creating your digital presence fun, easy, and affordable. With one account, you can create a website in minutes with email marketing tools to collect email addresses, allowing you to send newsletters and automated emails to your subscribers. It all works seamlessly together with one account and one subscription. Forget spending all your time and energy just trying to remember what each account does and what your login information is. On top of that, OfferingTree has an embedded scheduling feature, so if you already have a website that you love, you can use it for online payments and scheduling. To learn more about what OfferingTree can do for your digital presence, visit offeringtree.com/MBM. OfferingTree has been supporting MBM for over a year now, and I not only love the product, but I also love the people. OfferingTree is providing special pricing for MBM listeners, so be sure to visit offeringtree.com/MBM. That's offeringtree.com/MBOM to receive the discount. All right, now back to the episode. And so I'm curious, so we've talked about the branding aspect and kind of diving into the copy. And then what are some tips for, taking this copy and putting it on your website? So kind of that, like, okay, this is the tone of voice I speak in. How do I actually make this into, words that make somebody understand who I am on my website and what I offer, and, create sales pages for products and services and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So I can't stress enough, again, going back to like knowing who you're speaking to. That's going to be so, so important for your website specifically, and talking to them directly. So not saying things like they or them or he or she, really saying, using words like you and yours, so that they really feel like, you're speaking to them. And studying their behaviors and their characteristics. Again, going back to all of that all of that's going to be so crucial and so beneficial for you to start building out your website copy. Just so that they know, once they're reading, going over, like even on your homepage, it's so important. You have like 3 seconds for them to grab their attention to say, okay, I'm in the right place or I'm not in the right place. And then they bounce off. So it's really, really important to really just show them who you are and what your service is and how it's going to help them solve their problem right then and there. That would be like my first biggest tip. And then also painting a picture of what it feels like to work with you, I think is really important. A lot of times I'll see on clients' websites or just other people's websites, they don't do too much of that. And I always think that there should be more of like, like paint that picture. Walk me through the process. Like if it's almost like if you're inviting people over to your house for a party and you're like opening the door to the first few that get there, right? I remember reading this somewhere. I can't remember where I read it. This isn't from me, but you open the door and you're greeting the first few that get there, and you give them like this beautiful 5-star experience because they're like the first 2 people that get to your house for the party. But then as everybody else trickles in, you're not able to get to everybody. So you have to, it has to be an easy flow for them to be able to, okay, they let themselves in. They grab a glass themselves. They have their hors d'oeuvres. It's a natural flow for them to know, how to have a nice time at your house. But those first few, you're showing them around, you're showing them your new living room or whatever, you're having the glass of wine with them. So that's what it's like when people get to your website. Like, what experience are they having with you? Don't wait for the call to action button to get them to make an action. I always say, like, emphasize action all throughout. Really walk them through, again, like if they're that guest at your house, what it would be like to work with you. So you could even say something like, going back to like your in your space of yoga, saying something like, when you practice with our ancient yoga teachings, you'll instantly deepen and purify your body, mind, and nervous system, allowing you to develop healthy lifestyle habits, or something like that. So that instantly paints a picture for me that I know that I'll experience this in my body and in my life if I start practicing yoga with this studio. That's a big one as well. And then also, one thing that I was like really bad about doing at the beginning is having more like white space and like breathing room for the reader. So this is more so like formatting tips, but it's like so super important just to like have it all be aesthetically pleasing, and the format of the copy be in line with the design as well of your website. And I remember I used to always have these like long written out paragraphs because I had so much I wanted to say, but it's not pleasing and it's not easy to digest for the reader. So just having that white space and that breathing room is really important too, to just really break up that copy. So that would be like the biggest tips that I have. And then for your about page, really, really understanding that it's not only about you, it's not only your story, but it's also like referring back to that person who's reading it. Like, how are you showing, like, yeah, tell your story and weave in your story, but at the same time, why is it important for the person reading, and how are you going to help solve their problem or change their life if they buy your product or buy into your service?
Yeah, I love that. I think sometimes too, maybe we think about these things that we know really well. So it's very like obvious for us. But I think it's really big to remember that, if somebody's never been there before, they don't have any idea of what, this is all about. And I think that the example you talked about of like somebody coming to your house, like you have to think about somebody who's like never been to your house before. Like you wouldn't assume that they just know where to put their shoes or their jacket,
Mm-hmm.
where to get a glass, where the beverages are, like where the food is, where they can sit. It's like you kind of have to guide them through all of that. And I think that definitely makes sense. It's actually interesting because I work with a couple of yoga studios, and the one I work with here in my hometown in Alberta, it's interesting because I know the studio so well and I know the processes so well that it's like, if I'm looking at how the experience is for somebody, I have to kind of fully exit from it and think about like, if I didn't know anything about this,
Yeah.
is it clear what you need to do? Is it clear where they need to go, where they park, how they pay, when they show up for class, what they do once they get there? And I feel like that's the stuff that makes somebody feel really comfortable. Because I think we can probably all relate to this idea of like, you show up at somebody's house and you walk in, and you don't know where anything is or what to do. And you're like, oh, I feel like super awkward and uncomfortable here. Versus
Yeah.
when somebody kind of guides you through that whole process, you're like, immediately feel like you're at home.
You feel welcome, right? And especially if you don't know anybody there, right? Like you want to feel welcome, you want to feel at home and a little bit more comfortable. And that's exactly the same experience you want to have on your website too.
And so, kind of like with the copy in doing this, like, how do we kind of manage, I guess, like having too much text on our website? Like, how do we give these instructions very like clearly and concisely and make sure that we're sticking to the voice and personal brand that we're creating? Because I think at the same time, like, you don't want to have somebody arriving to your website and have like a whole body of text that tells them everything, because like they're not going to read that, right?
Yeah. So how do you manage like having too much text on your website?
Yeah, like giving them the instructions they need so that they're clear, with like balancing not having, I guess, too much words there to the point that they're like, I'm not going to read this.
Yeah. So there's some like templates out there. I follow Ashlyn Carter. She's a well-known copywriter in our space, that she creates templates on like website copy and email templates and things like that. So I liked using her website copy template, where basically like you're looking at what your homepage should look like with the amount of copy there, what your about page should look like with the amount of copy, et cetera, your services, all that. And so making sure you're kind of like looking in your space, in your area of yoga studios and mindfulness, looking at other like competition websites and seeing how theirs are set up, and then kind of like reassessing how do you want yours to be set up. And then with these templates that she's always like, she does a great job of like outlining it with like making sure your headline is attention grabbing headline, your sub headline's great. And then, on a homepage, you don't want too much text there, but you want to lead them somewhere. Your call to action, again, you're leading them where? To the next room, or to sit down, or to get a glass of champagne or whatever. So your call to action might lead them further down the homepage, but at least it's split up, so it's not a lot of paragraph or not a lot of text heavy right there, right when they see your website, above the fold. But then if that call to action maybe leads them somewhere further down the page, it can show you a little bit more about who you are and what you do and why, what this tool or what this product can do for you. And then somewhere where you could have a little bit more text is on your about page, because again, you're talking more about your story. So it's a little bit more of an in-depth about you. And if somebody wants to learn more, they can have that text there. Services page might be somewhere where you have more text because you're wanting to go more into your process and in your what your service is and how it serves your people, how it serves them. But really being, and then like the contact page obviously will be less text heavy. So like really being aware of like what pages are really heavy with text and which ones aren't. And then again, you can go back and you can even test it, like just launch the website or put it out there and ask friends and family or people that you trust with their experience, how does this look to you? And then see how it's managing, see who it's attracting. And if it is attracting, Google Analytics is another great tool as well to look at. You can go in the back end and just kind of look at what pages are being most visited, what's the bounce rate, how long are people staying on that page, and then kind of reassess with, is it too much text heavy or do I need more text? Is it clear what I'm saying? So that's kind of my advice for that.
Yeah, I think that those are great tips. So thanks for sharing those. And one of the things that you mentioned in there was this like integration of story. And I feel like storytelling is such a powerful way to connect with people. It's actually really cool. I just taught in like the business of yoga section of a 300-hour yoga teacher training. And one of the things that I got them to do was we did a lot of this like personal branding work, and then they created their bios. And then in their presentations at the end, they read them to one another. And it was so cool to see these people who've been working together every single day over the last couple months really connect with one another through their bios. And a big thing that I encouraged them to do was to tell their stories, like why did you become a yoga teacher? And it was so amazing to see like in person, well, over Zoom because pandemic, but in person on the internet, see them like come together and feel this added connection to one another. So it's like, I know that storytelling works, but how do we kind of integrate and weave our story in through our copy and our brand and on our websites?
Yeah. Well, I love that you did that. And I love that you were able to see like the firsthand fruits and results out of that and hear everybody's bios. That's so inspiring. So I'm a big advocate of storytelling and just weaving it in throughout our lives and throughout our content and our copy. Because, when we listen to stories, our brains interpret that and like if we're actually experiencing it in real life. So that's why information through story is so much more memorable than when it's not. And it's one of the most powerful ways to activate, to inspire. And I love this quote. I want to share my favorite poet, Khalil Gibran, said that next to hunger and thirst, our most basic human need is for storytelling. So it's been around for centuries, and it's so beautiful that we can weave it throughout our lives. And still to this day, it is so powerful and prominent. So when weaving it through into our copy and our content and videos and blogs, website, you should always be aware of your punchline. So what's the end goal? What do you want people to do after reading your story, after listening to your story? And everything you should say should ultimately lead to that one goal that will deepen your reader's understanding of who you are and, like you said, why you do what you do. And at the same time, influence them to make an action, because that's what copywriting is. Make an action or a behavioral change or whatever it is you want them to do, whether that be signing up to your newsletter or participating in your campaign or donating or purchasing a course or whatever it is, or, coming into your yoga studio. And so on your about page, like I mentioned earlier, you can do a little bit more of the storytelling. But I always say be careful of not talking too much about yourself and making sure you're always referring back to you, who's reading it. So why is it important for them? And then, so like 5 things that I think are really key elements to think about when you're thinking about storytelling and how to embody it or how to include it, I guess, are first would be learning how to make other people care. So those who's reading, how to make them care. So how do you make them feel inspired and compassionate? And this just with the story in itself will help. But also looking up some words or like phrases that that will really resonate. And with yoga instructors in general, you guys are all, everybody's very mindful and compassionate, and you have a lot of empathy within yoga instructors. So it's easy to kind of like embed that, I feel like, within your field. Again, going back to like maybe looking at templates. So Ashlyn Carter, another, I'm going to mention her again. She has a great swipe file of already created words and phrases to energize and to embed in your copy. So that's maybe one way of looking at it. The second one would be to create anticipation. So like leave your listener or your reader wanting more. Don't make it so predictable, and don't make it so that they know what's coming next. So like try and sprinkle the fairy dust and dangle the little carrot above them for them wanting more. And you can do this throughout email sequences too. And then the third one would be choosing a strong theme. So a well-told story always has a very central and foundational theme. It sets the stage for what you're about to share. Kind of going through that and sticking with that theme. The fourth one would be invoking wonder. So as we all know, the best stories and movies, they always have amazement and wonder and just this magical storyline. So using that, a little bit of that, you can use your imagination or, totally embody or, share your unique, crazy story that you have that you've lived in your life. We all have those stories deep down that we just, don't share too often. And then the fifth tip I would say is always relate to your audience's human experience by using, and we talked about this a lot in the past. In my last job, I did this storytelling for sustainability course, and I talked about the 12 archetypes. So I don't know if you've heard of that, the framework for understanding the individual personalities and behaviors. That it was based off of Carl Jung's research. And so there's like the innocent, the hero, the caregiver, the creator, the magician, all of those different archetypes. So I love the idea of just like sprinkling those and using those characters in your storyline, whether you're talking about yourself or your family member or the reader itself, the client you're trying to embrace. So like really just like embrace, like finding that character and making that archetype and creating that archetype into your story will make your story more alive and relatable. So those are some of the basic storytelling tips. And if you're new to this and you're just like, oh my gosh, this is going to feel really forced and really awkward, I promise the more you practice telling and writing stories, the better you'll get at it. And journaling helps a lot too, to improve your storytelling. I remember I stumbled once upon this journal prompt that said something like, look around your room, choose 3 items in your room, and then now tell a story from the perspective of these 3 items. And so like that right there is just an easy little journal entry. I did it. I wrote up a story. I chose these crystals in my room and my bamboo plants. And it was a totally silly, meaningless story, but it helps improve your storytelling techniques and skills. And then you can just keep doing that and keep writing and journaling to help you improve.
Yeah, I love those tips. And I think too, like there's a lot of similarities in what you're talking about with these storytelling tips and like a lot of the work that, we do with theming and yoga classes. And so I think that, yoga teachers, if you're listening, if you're feeling overwhelmed, I think thinking about maybe like the process that you go through to weave a theme through in your yoga classes and create story through your classes. And, maybe writing feels hard, maybe record yourself talking about it and then, type it out after and either get like somebody to proofread it or work with a copywriter to kind of hone that, or just like read it back and see how it feels.
Yeah.
But I think that could be another thing. Like if you really struggle with the writing, to think about the speaking aspect, because I think that for most yoga teachers, like the speaking is honed quite a bit, and sometimes it's really hard to like translate your words into copy. Like I personally really like writing, but I know like for my mom, for example, she has these thoughts and feelings and she can tell stories and stuff, but when she goes to write it down, it's like she totally draws a blank on, what she wants to say. And so I'm always like, just record yourself saying it. You know how to say it, and then type it out after. It'll be fine.
That's exactly true. Yep. That's a very good technique. And you just reminded me of my, my yoga instructor in Costa Rica, she would do that too. Not the recording part, but she would write out, like, I know at the end, a lot of yoga instructors always have this beautiful message and this beautiful, significant message that they want to leave their students with for the end of the day. And she always had the most amazing ones. And it was always like story related. And she'd write it down and you just kind of listen to it while you're meditating or while you're in Shavasana. And I just always thought, that's for me, that like instilled in me. I remembered her words. It was through a story. It resonated with me. So even if your yoga instructors did that and started to include that within their messages at the end or even at the beginning of their class that they use, and starting to kind of use tidbits of that within their copy or their website or their content that they're writing, that's already right there, content that you already were doing for your class already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes I think we think about how things have to be like new and I guess
Yeah.
unique and stuff like that. But a lot of times we have a lot of these different pieces and it's just about kind of fitting them together. And I think that like you don't have to recreate the wheel. Like you can, if there's themes that you're really passionate about that you teach in your classes all the time, and maybe you have, quotes or poems or phrases that you've already written out that you share with your classes. I mean, that could be great stuff to pull and integrate into your website because that's a piece of who you are and who your brand is. Like it doesn't have to be all new stuff that somebody's never heard before. It might actually feel very welcoming for somebody to go to your website and see the quote that you've read 100 times in class to them.
Exactly. You're so right. You don't always have to repurpose the wheel or reinvent the wheel, repurpose the work and make it easier on yourself. You're so right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a hard thing to remember, though. It's something that I have to remind myself of constantly. Like if I'm ever stuck with blog posts to write or social media to create or,
Yeah.
something I want to talk about in a newsletter, it's sometimes like, oh, I need to think of something new. And, there's nothing
Valuable.
wrong with like, yeah, exactly. Like it needs to be something that's like mind blowing. And sometimes
Right.
it's hearing the same thing over and over that can actually be really reaffirming.
I agree. I'm the same way with specifically with email marketing. I'm like terrible with it. And I need to get better. Like I always put it off to the end, but I know that I need to nurture my email better and more often. And so I'm like, I do the same thing where I'm like, well, I'm not going to write anything today because I don't have anything yet. It's like that mind blowing or valuable. But again, it's just thinking about the little things that you could offer, like what you watched. I don't know, what series are you watching that gave you some sort of inspiration or some that reminded you of something on on TV that you want to share with your audience, or or a song or whatever. It doesn't have to be something extraordinary and big, but as long as it's something that's adding a little bit of value to your audience, it's definitely worth sharing.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Yeah, we did a lot of like theming work in the 300-hour yoga teacher training that I did last year. I remember when I was first introduced to the concept, I was like, oh my gosh, but if I'm teaching like 5 classes a week, even if I'm teaching like 2 classes a week, like this is so much, like I have to think of so many things. And then as I got into it, I realized that like the little messages that I wanted to share with people practicing were things that were already, in my head and in my day-to-day life. And I didn't need to think of something new and profound. It's like sometimes just the little messages are the ones that actually hit home. And, sometimes it's sharing that thing like a couple times over before, it hits home with somebody else. And it's definitely like very similar learnings for me in terms of like the teaching side of things.
I love that. That's true. And those are the little things that you're just like, oh, I have to write it down and you know what I'm going to say. And no, sometimes it's just going inwards and they're already there. They're inside.
Yeah, for sure. It's just
I
like
love
tapping
that.
into them.
Right.
Amazing. So I'm curious, we've talked a lot about different aspects of copywriting and creating copy for your website, honing in on your brands, telling your story. I'm curious for you as you've built this business, like what are some of the biggest business lessons that you've learned?
Yeah. So I would say definitely finding your niche early on is super important. When I first started, I was kind of just taking anyone that would want to hire me, but as soon as I niched down and decided I love website copy and I love focusing on brand messaging and how they align and complement each other, is when I really started attracting the right people because I was talking about it more and I was, getting more experienced in it, and my results were coming out beautifully. So definitely that would be finding your niche. And it's not gonna happen overnight, and it might not happen until you get more and more clients and understand where it is. But once you do, you'll start attracting those right people that you want around you. Then I would also say another big one for me is reading more. It's funny because I'm terrible at reading and being consistent at it, because I absolutely love getting lost in a book, but I'm just really bad at like making it a priority in my life. So actually doing it, and every time I do prioritize it, I notice that I'm like 10 times more inspired and creative. So that has been a big tip for me, just like a big lesson that I've learned. Just sitting, and coming. I guess that also ties into with like the mindfulness too, like just tapping into yourself and into your highest creative self, and making sure you're giving space for yourself too, not just always in front of a screen and working. And then the other one would be I remember at the beginning, like not only thinking like a business owner, but also acting like one too. So taking responsibility for all of the hats that I need to wear to reach my business goals is really important. When I was first starting out, sometimes it's like your family and your friends might not really understand what you're doing. Copywriting, what's that? They might think it's just a side passion project, but as soon as you step it up and you fully embrace being not only a copywriter, but also a consultant to your clients, a business manager, a marketer, an entrepreneur, is when you actually start showing up for your business and impressing all those people around you. And so I think it hones in well with, yoga business owners as well, because you're really wearing a lot of hats. You're not just teaching a yoga class. So those would be my top biggest lessons.
Yeah, I love those. Thanks for sharing those. And yeah, I think the reading one is actually like a really potent reminder, because I found like anytime I'm stuck creatively, that's the word I'm looking for, creatively, or I don't know like what the next step I want to do is, or I'm just feeling like, oh, I'm spending all day hunched in front of a computer, just like, cranking
Yeah.
out emails and stuff. Like getting lost in a really good fiction novel is
Oh,
like
I
one of
love
the
that.
best things I can do for my mind, I feel like.
Mhm. Oh my gosh, I totally agree. And that, you push it off. At least I do. I'm like, oh, I don't have time to read. But then when I do get lost in that book, I'm like, this is why I love reading.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, it's just another form of like self-care and taking care of ourselves, right? And it's a reminder that we can't fill somebody else's cup up when our cup is empty.
It's
And,
empty.
filling your cup up can look so different for different people. But for me, I definitely find reading reading shouldn't be something that I'm like, oh, if I answer X amount of emails today, I'm allowed to read. It's like
Yeah,
reading is like a part of creativity. And it's whether or
exactly.
not, I'm creating a program for MBOM, or, creating a podcast episode, or just needing like a little bit of inspiration or a break from like the constant go, go, go of like, you need to do this, you need to do this. And there's this thing and this project, blah, blah, blah. It's like just
Right.
this nice opportunity to connect back with this kind of playful aspect of myself and my brain.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. I love how how you mentioned about filling yourself up too, because you can't do it if you're on no charge and you're empty. You've got to also take care of yourself and your mind, and disconnect a bit. Sometimes staring at the screen for so long is so exhausting. So it's good to just, take a little break and give yourself that luxury too. Because a lot of times you're like, I can't afford to do that right now, or I don't deserve to do that right now. But you
Mhm.
always deserve it. You always deserve that luxury.
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting too, because I'm also a big fan of your last point, which is kind of like taking your business seriously, talking about your business seriously. Like you can't really expect other people to take you and your offering seriously if you don't take yourself seriously. And so it
Right.
is kind of this balance between like, okay, I am like a badass business owner. I do this thing. This is what I offer, being confident in that, but then also giving yourself space from that to be the human being that you are. And it's like
Right.
in those moments where like for me, I love taking baths. Like baths are like my self-care time, and reading a
Nice.
fiction novel in the bath with a cup of tea or like a glass of wine is like the
That's the
ultimate
sweet
for
spot.
me. Yeah. And it's like
Love
that
that.
rejuvenation
Yeah.
allows me to show up the next day and be like fully confident in what I'm doing. And so it's kind of like this balance between these two different aspects of like being a business owner and then also being like a creative human.
Yeah, I love that too. I love the way you describe that as well. Because we're not just here to carry out our professional life. We're here to be humans too and have a human experience and share that with others. I love that.
Absolutely. And so I'm curious, if people are interested in learning more about you, Christine, where can they go to find you?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, christinemarielacayo.com, or my Instagram, same name, Christine Marie Lacayo. And then for any specific like branding questions or, purpose finding and all that we mentioned earlier, I mentioned that my business partner and I just started a business recently this last week. It's called Siembra Studios. So it's in Spanish. You'll like that.
I love it.
Siembra, Siembra studios.eco. And we've just created like a Facebook group for changemaker entrepreneurs as well. So if anybody's interested in that type of work, like branding and copywriting and business responsibility, responsible business practices, that's where we'll be talking more about that there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation. This has been so awesome. I've loved connecting with you and learning a little bit more about copywriting and sharing some stuff on branding and storytelling. So thank you for your time today, Christine.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I really enjoyed it. It was such a beautiful conversation, and I hope that I provided some value to your audience.
All right. I hope that everyone enjoyed that episode of the podcast with Christine Lacayo. Make sure you go check her out. You can learn a little bit more about copywriting from her. And if you are looking for a copywriter, I definitely recommend working with her. Thanks again to our sponsor, OfferingTree. Head on over to offeringtree.com/MBOM to get an exclusive discount for listeners. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the podcast. To find links, notes, resources, and everything mentioned in today and all episodes of the show, you can head on over to mbomyoga.com. You can find the podcast and myself on Facebook and social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And I would love for you to join the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badasses. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please make sure you reach out to me at info@mbomyoga.com. And last of all, if you enjoyed this episode of the show, please make sure you hit subscribe and leave a review for the podcast. It would mean the world. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.